Welcome back, horror fans, cinephiles, and giallo enthusiasts. This is Tanner Leeser, your host for all things giallo here on The King in Giallo. Our next stop on our journey through giallo cinema is the third giallo film from Dario Argento, Four Flies on Grey Velvet, released in 1971. Here is Four Flies on Grey Velvet Overview. Four Flies on Grey Velvet is an Italian and French co-production. The film is directed by Dario Argento, who also wrote the screenplay along with Luigi Cozzi and Mario Foglietti. The music is composed by Ennio Morricone. The cast includes Michael Brandon as Robert Tobias, Mimsy Farmer as Nina Tobias, Jean-Pierre Marielle as Arosio, Bud Spencer as Godfrey, aka God, Oreste Lionello as the Professor, Francine Racchette as Dalia, and Calisto Calisti as Carlo Morosi. The plot follows Roberto, the drummer of a prog rock band who over the past several days has had a strange man watching him. One night after a rehearsal, Roberto confronts the man in an empty theater, the result of which leads to the accidental stabbing and death of the stalker, which is photographed by a second mystery person from the balcony wearing what looks like a doll mask. Soon after the bizarre encounter, Roberto begins receiving phone calls and letters of the murder, prompting him to hire a private investigator named Arosio to help him discover who is behind all of this blackmail. As days go by, more and more of Roberto's friends end up being murdered, and he is made to be the prime suspect. Dario Argento at this time was on fire and was a giallo film director rock star. His first film, The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, 1970, was a hit and had managed to bring this strange little genre to the forefront and prove that these types of films could both be a hit with audiences and critics and generate buckets of money for producers. His second film, The Cat o' Nine Tails, 1971, was also a big success for the young director, but the process was a nightmare for him due to the German co-financiers attempting to steal the movie out from under him and churn out something that was closer to a mere carbon copy of Bird. With this third film, and final of Argento's Animal trilogy, the director would find himself working with nearly unchallenged creative freedom by his financial backers. The stylistic elements seen in his second film, Cat, are further developed here, particularly in regards to the fragmented editing and the camera work. The editing contains bold cuts and betrays temporal logic, whereas the camera floats around like a fly, and slow motion is also incorporated in a powerful and effective way. In Cat, we saw broad strokes of these artistic choices, whereas in Bird, there was a much more subdued and traditional type approach to the filmmaking. Here, in Flies, the style is unleashed, but in a similar fashion to how Cat behaves as the bridge to Flies and its display of style, Flies itself would operate as a bridge to the wildly stylistic Deep Red in 1975. Contrary to the amazing style, the film suffers from weak characters with little development. Roberto is a lackluster anti-hero type whose attitude in the wake of the plot's events may be understandable, yet is no less endearing for an audience to follow and sympathize with. His wife Nina is something of an enigma, and her cousin, Dalia, is rather vapid and just sort of floats in and out of the story. The friends close to Roberto are leaning on the side of being artistic pseudo-intellectuals, or rather dilettantes, and they believe that they are fonts of wisdom and philosophical ideas. Now, these are intentionally portrayed as character flaws by Argento, but the balance is not quite there, and these characters instead just come off as annoying. He thankfully sidesteps this style of character writing in his next giallo films for the most part, but this sort of thing would be an ongoing fault which would plague several of his gialli to come. Writing intentionally flawed characters that just are not super great. In terms of the technical aspects of the film, it is gorgeous and competently arranged and executed. The opening has been said could be viewed as a precursor to music videos. Argento is known to have done a lot of unnecessary work on this film in order to achieve the shots he wanted to capture. He managed to use a high-speed camera which shot in 1,000 frames per second, compared to the industry standard 24 frames per second, in order for him to film the climax moment of the movie, which uses an insane slow-motion sequence intensified by the most haunting track ever composed by Morricone. Speaking of the maestro, Morricone's score is highly memorable for the nightmarish track which closes the film. However, the overall score for the movie is rather all over the place and not always in a good way. It is difficult to criticize Morricone, but considering his previous work in the genre, his scores for Bird and Cat overall are much better, and in this same year of 1971, his scores for Black Belly and Fifth Chord are likewise more competent and have a cohesiveness that binds them. Flies' score spans from being utterly otherworldly and sublime to being entirely generic and seemingly uninspired. I suppose it could be said that the unevenness of the soundtrack highlights and accentuates the closing track all the more. Morricone's work on this film would lead to a rift between the composer and the director, causing them to not work together until 1996, nearly 25 years later, on Argento's The Stendhal Syndrome. Argento had requested Morricone to change some of the music, which led to a sort of scandal in Italy, and in Argento's words, after Morricone stormed off, Argento was left to direct the music. American actor Michael Brandon leads the cast. He was hired following his performance in Lovers and Other Strangers, 1970, which Argento felt was a powerful performance. His role was also considered for Michael York, Terence Stamp, and Jean-Louis Trintignant, to name a few. Brandon is convincing when he's playing the drums, but beyond this, his performance doesn't really add much dimension to the character, whereas, hypothetically, Trintignant would surely have been able to express the deeper dimensions of the character, but probably would have fumbled the moments when made to play drums, if this bit from Deadly Sweet is any indicator. American actor Mimsy Farmer is Roberto's wife, Nina. She was born in 1945 in Chicago, Illinois, and made her film debut in 1961. She garnered some much-deserved attention for her role in More, 1969, a counterculture romance film by Barbara Schroeder. Her work on this film was also her way into Italian cinema. Her role in Flies is a tad flat, although she makes up for it near the end. She seems to have no on-screen chemistry with Brandon, but this may have been a tactical decision by Argento. After this film, Farmer would star in the 1975 giallo film Autopsy. Plus, she would go on to appear in Lucio Fulci's The Black Cat, 1981, and Ruggero Deodato's Body Count, 1987, before her retirement from film in the early 1990s. Jean-Pierre Marielle steals the show, it must be said. His character comes off as a stock caricature of gay men in the 1970s, but Marielle brings an authenticity to the role, charged with much-needed humanity and much appreciated humor, and ultimately becomes one of the greatest performances in Argento's canon of films. Spaghetti Western icon Bud Spencer also is in the film. Real name, Carlo Pedasoli, he plays Roberto's wise friend who is a bit of a wayfarer. Spencer was a beloved star at this time, having appeared in The Five-Man Army, 1969, which was co-written by Argento, as well as the best friend character in the spaghetti western comedy They Call Me Trinity, 1970, where he starred alongside Terence Hill.
He's the guy who's the talk of the town with the restless gown.
Get going.
You like to see that again?
Cut it out.
Did you get it?
Spencer says he took the role because he both wanted to support Argento and to prove that he could play variegated roles, although I'll say I do feel a similarity to his role in Trinity. He is surely an entertaining character with some of the best lines of dialogue in the script, and interestingly enough, The character's nickname of God was a holdover from the book which The Bird with the Crystal Plumage was directly inspired from, The Screaming Mimi by Frederick Brown. Here is some IMDb trivia for the film. Because of the falling out with Ennio Morricone, Argento would adopt Goblin, the rock group, as his new main composer. A slow-motion bullet effect is used in the film, predating The Matrix, 1999, as well as many Hong Kong action films. Deep Purple was originally considered for the soundtrack. The Italian poster for Dario Argento's earlier film, The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, can be seen in a street shot as Roberto drives through the city. In the United States, the soundtrack by Ennio Morricone was available on CD long before the movie itself, which was unavailable until early 2009. It was Jean-Pierre Marielle's idea to make his character gay. Some of the earliest cast considerations for the main role of Roberto Tobias also included Tom Courtenay, James Taylor, and Ringo Starr. Bud Spencer took the role of Godfrey in the film as a favor for Dario Argento, who he became lifelong friends with during the shooting of two westerns the latter had written, Today We Kill, Tomorrow We Die, 1968, and The Five-Man Army, 1969. He did not take a fee for his services, but asked not to have his likeness used to promote the film. This was originally intended to be Dario Argento's swan song to the giallo genre. This would later change once The 5 Days, 1973, did poorly at the box office. A version shown in the United States is dubbed in English. The title, cast, credits, and all text within the film are in Italian. In the final scene, the dialogue suddenly alternates between English and Italian. Michael York was originally cast in the role of Roberto, but had to withdraw when Zeppelin, 1971, went over schedule. The moment involving a slow-motion car crash in the end took 12 different cars to be wrecked in order to get the effect Dario Argento wanted. This is the only movie of Dario Argento's classic gialli in which he doesn't show us the assassin in the first sequence. Dario Argento originally didn't want to use the image caught in the retina plot device since it was too fantastic for the giallo genre, but when Carlo Rambaldi showed him how the effect would look like in the finished film, he changed his mind. But I digress. On to the review. Spoilers ahead for those of you who haven't yet seen the film. You've been warned. My prediction for the movie's GialliTally score. Based on my recent viewing, I observed a decent amount of cliches, but nothing too crazy. Hardly any nudity, the kills are fairly few, and the flashback-type sequences are likewise in a moderate number. I will go with what I reckon is a high bet and say 600 points. Well, let's begin the GialliTally and review portion of the video. Beginning, as always, with the previewing cliches. The repeat offenders are 1 point for actor, 3 for writer, 3 for composer, and 5 for director. Calisto Calisti was in Orgasmo, A Quiet Place to Kill, and Oasis of Fear, 3 points. Marisa Fabri was in The Weekend Murders, 1 point. Gildo Di Marco was in The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, 1 point. Tom Felegi was in Oasis of Fear, The Case of the Scorpion's Tail, and The Cat o' Nine Tails, 3 points. Dario Argento wrote The Bird with the Crystal Plumage and The Cat o' Nine Tails, 6 points. Luigi Cozzi wrote a story which was partially adapted into The Cat o' Nine Tails, 3 points. Ennio Morricone composed for The Black Belly of the Tarantula, The Cold Eyes of Fear, The Cat o' Nine Tails, A Lizard in a Woman's Skin, The Forbidden Photos of a Lady Above Suspicion, The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, Vergogna Schifosi, and A Quiet Place in the Country, 24 points. And Dario Argento directed The Bird with the Crystal Plumage and The Cat o' Nine Tails, 10 points. Cliche points for the title. 4 flies on gray velvet. Contains a number, 4, 5 points. Contains an animal, flies, 5 points. And contains a color, gray, 5 points. First look, 25 points for the Italian director, and an additional 15 points for the movie releasing during the golden age of giallo cinema. And despite my opinion of the movie, I'll grant it to be a quintessential giallo, as I do support the entire Argento animal trilogy receiving this honor. 15 points. And would you look at that, it is Pilato clock. The movie opens with an opening credits sequence where we instantly are treated to some drums. The drummer is our protagonist, Roberto. He looks back and notices this man spying upon him while recording. Z is for zoom, 5 points. Honestly, we do not have a lot of zooms in the movie. More music. Roberto becomes pestered by a persistent fly. Animals featured, fly, 2 points. Art featured, music or a musician, 5 points. In a flashback moment, we see Roberto, after kicking a ball to some playing kids, noticing again the stalker following him. C is for children, 5 points. Urban locales, 2 points. Italian locales, Turin, 3 points. The fly, or maybe that's a mosquito, goes even harder. During another flashback while driving around, Roberto catches the stalker in his rear view mirror, tailing him. The final moment of this lengthy intro shows Roberto crushing the pesky pest under his cymbals. Foreshadowing, perhaps? Upon leaving, Roberto has a brief talk with one of his bandmates who has been flubbing his cues. Once again, he spies the stalker from across the way. Roberto decides enough is enough and follows the man. This sequence, we are treated to a few interesting shots. First person POV shot, 5 points. The man disappears inside this theater just as a real musician exits. We get these great shots, which we'll see again in deep red. Inside now, the theater looks a tad disheveled, with most of the general floor seating removed. Roberto grabs the man and confronts him over stalking him during the past week. The man feigns knowledge of this, I don't know what you're talking about, sort of thing. We cut to someone hiding in the shadows, donning the creepiest mask of a smiling boy. The confrontation continues. The man loses his shades, then draws a stiletto knife. K is for knives, 5 points. Roberto edges forward. Suddenly, lights burst on from the rafters. In the confusion, Roberto goes for the knife, which accidentally plunges into the man. Furthermore, Roberto accidentally pushes the man off and into the orchestra pit, all while being photographed by the masked person. Now, I know this is intended to be accidental, but just watch this again. Does it not look like Roberto turned the knife on his stalker and absolutely pushed him off the precipice? I think it does, but I'll chalk that one up to the choreography. The masked person snaps numerous photos of the murder, while Roberto essentially stands there and poses while holding the knife. Sharp. Extra points for K is for knives for the blade reflecting the light and being bloodied. 5 more points. G is for gloves, 5 points. W is for witness, 5 points. And U is for undercover, 5 points. And as soon as it all began, the lights go out and the masked photographer vanishes into the night. The first instance of Ennio Morricone's haunting score plays as we follow Roberto home. A woman looks out a window while smoking, watching a man shuffle down the sidewalk. A cat snoozes. Interior shots dark enough to rival the Battle of Winterfell. We then find Roberto in bed with his wife. Just as he motions to nestle her, the phone rings. She answers it. T is for telephone, 5 points. She tells Roberto that no one was there. Roberto begins to have more flashbacks to his encounter earlier. Coinciding with this, we see the reel of film developing, and a particular frame which suggests heavily that Roberto did in fact murder the man. Well, he kinda did. The next day, Roberto reads in the paper about an unidentified body found last night. His wife, Nina, says goodbye, but only the housemaid responds. Nina storms out. Outside, we have this encounter with the mailman.
And don't make the same mistake again.
I'd like to see you in my shoes. Put all this mail to deliver.
I want to stop and point out that this film tries a little too hard to sprinkle in the comedic relief moments. I think there are actually more instances where I watched this recently and laughed at things that were not intended to be funny versus times I actually laughed at the jokes. Let's count these up as they come. Moving on, Nina asks her neighbor, Maria, what's going on, and she tells her how the mailman is such a doofus and keeps dropping off other people's mail, and the recent flub meant that she received a neighbor's Swedish pornography, which she was compelled to look through. Look, just because you knowingly receive someone else's mail doesn't mean you have to look through it. Great shot. Roberto opens a letter marked for him, and despite the envelope being white, this is blackmail, because the contents of which are an identification card belonging to the man he accidentally killed. We jump cut to Roberto at a house party he and Nina are throwing, in one of the only instances that a visual jump cut actually works for me in this film. One of the guests tells a story.
An execution in Saudi Arabia.
Sounds gory.
They're still chopping off heads.
Yeah, they, still are. The man describes an execution scene, the details of which are replicated for us in a scene which will be cut to throughout the film. I will include this as a flashback, despite Roberto not having seen this actual event. After the man finishes describing the beheading, another man tells an interesting, similar-toned story to somewhat lighten the mood. Roberto walks off and begins perusing the records, where he finds that someone has hidden a printout of the incriminating photograph of him among the records. As the maid comes out, she gives a mighty suspicious look, then attempts to look innocent and go about her work. Later that night, Roberto dreams about the beheading described earlier. As I said, I will count these as flashbacks later. The stiletto goes in, the head jerks back, and the sword begins to swing. Roberto wakes up. Some sound repeatedly knocking calls him to action out of bed. The sound stops just as he investigates. The maid seems to be asleep. The house seems to be empty. The cat seems a tad agitated, though, on the defensive. The lights are out. Suddenly, Roberto is attacked from behind. Something like a garrote wraps around his neck, and the masked person whispers to him. They claim they could kill him now, but won't. They'll wait, but might inform the police. Roberto is told that he cannot reach out to anyone for help, that he'll be all alone in this matter. The stranglehold is released, and the blackmailer disappears once again. Roberto struggles to his feet and looks around, restoring power to the house. His wife finds him stumbling around and asks him what the matter is, but he says nothing. L is for lies, 5 points. They argue some, her asserting that she heard noises, and him retorting that he said it was nothing. Their back and forth is overheard by the maid in bed. Nina persists and urges Roberto that he can tell her what's going on. He relents and confesses to accidentally killing a man a few days ago. Well, S is for secrets, 5 points. The maid gets out of bed and listens in as Roberto describes the blackmail. Nina asks if the man's name in the ID matches the name in the paper, but Roberto says that the paper only declared that a body was found, but did not identify the victim. When he goes to show Nina the ID and the photograph, they are gone, and he says that the masked intruder must have taken them. He assumes that Nina must not be believing him right now. She suggests that he must be overworked and under a lot of stress, and that she has a friend that he can talk to. But Roberto gets agitated at the mere suggestion that he is crazy and dismisses Nina. Y is for yelling, 5 points. Nina returns to inform Roberto that she's found something on the bedroom dresser with initials which match that of the deceased man. The two speculate what they can do, fearing not to involve the police. Nina urges them to just run away. Cut to Roberto taking the air. He walks and asks this vagrant where he can find God. We receive some forced attempt at levity. The man tells him God is fishing down by the river. Roberto finds his friend, Godfrey, and the two engage in small talk, enter God's dilapidated cabin, meet his parrot, jerk off, and finally, Roberto tells God of his troubles. The murder, the blackmail. Rob mentions the photo stashed among the records, which wasn't there 30 minutes prior, suggesting the blackmailer must be someone close to him. Godfrey asks about his wife's family, reminding Rob that they're loaded, to which Roberto says that the blackmailer, whatever their motive is, has nothing to do with money. God's advice is to hire Gianni Arrosio as his private investigator and to recruit the man found earlier in the hammock, dubbed the Professor, to stand guard outside his house. The scene ends with a brief attempt at more comedy to showcase how eccentric the professor is. As Roberto comes home, he watches a mysterious person approach the front door. He tackles the person to the ground and begins beating them in the head with a thick stick of firewood.
What do you want? What do you want? What do you want?
This comedic moment actually does make me laugh, so at one point, the man is none other than the derpy mailman. Roberto tries to apologize, but the mailman runs off. Cut to the maid making a call from a public phone, accusing the mysterious person on the line that she saw them and that she has evidence as proof. We follow the telephone lines as we hear her blackmail the individual, saying that she doesn't care what their motive is, all she wants is money. She'll let them carry on their little game. She warns them not to involve the police and that she'll be waiting at a park for the money.
Not a great plan.
We see where the blackmailer is hiding with a stack of photographs of Roberto. We receive both an audible and visual flashback. We hear a voice. The voice is that of a man, a father perhaps, telling someone to stop acting like a baby and to never cry, as we see someone's POV of entering a padded room in an asylum. Cut to a straight razor. Cut now to Amelia, the maid, at the park waiting for the blackmailer. As she waits, we see children at play in the playground, two lovers smooching, overhead speakers playing music, nature. She seems about as bored as I am watching this, and pulls out a cigarette. After another moment, the music cuts out, and as she looks around, we receive some jarring jump cuts, which show everyone has disappeared. Now, say what you want, I'm just not a fan of this. The style just doesn't work for me. As she goes to leave, we jump cut from daylight to the middle of the night as she's still walking around. Okay, so the cut seems to suggest that she's lost because how else does that happen? She takes a fright and suddenly begins running, believing that she is being pursued, but we don't see anyone actually chasing her. We then have this awkward sequence where the music is blaringly loud as Amelia tries to escape the park, to then cut to near silence of someone's POV of them walking nonchalantly through the park, following her back and forth. I get what they're going for, but I cannot say that it's ultimately effective in my opinion. I've seen it done way better in other movies. I will add foot chase, 5 points. Amelia gets through the painfully tight space, emerging out the other side, cut off from the outside by a perilously tall wall, which she cannot scale. This couple walking by overhears Amelia and attempts to help. The man tries to jump the wall, but okay, I'm not sure whether that was meant to be funny, but that shit made me crack up. 1 for unintentionally funny. It's like he's sincerely not trying, but he knows she can't see him, so she can't call him out. The man says he will run around through the main gate, but Amelia pleads for him not to, for she's being chased and the assailant will kill her. He says nothing is going to happen, and then we hear her get killed. Yeah, this shit is pretty funny too. Another for unintentionally funny. I guess something did happen. Cut back to another house party. I see Roberto and Nina decided to play it safe. Dahlia, Nina's cousin, is invited to listen to a story called The Rape of Frankenstein. You know, for the kids. Roberto asks why Dahlia is here, preferring her to be sent home, which bothers Nina. We overhear the story, which isn't really that funny, but damn it, we must pad out the runtime. Roberto sits off to the side, looking upset. One of his bandmates asks what's the matter, considering that he didn't show up for practice earlier. The phone rings. Nina answers it, and her smile slowly fades. She simply says, "Yes, I see," and hangs up. She tells Roberto that the police called and said that Amelia was found with her throat cut, and that tomorrow she must go to the police station. Another nightmare involving the beheading. Roberto awakens. We hear the cat. The cat is seen being approached by someone. The sound of a struggle with the cat is heard. A pillow is torn, the cat missing, and the door wide open. A message is left behind which translates as, "It was easy." Nina is fearful to remain in the house, stating the blackmailer must want to kill them. She pleads for Roberto to contact the police for help, but he rejects this idea, stating any admission on his part of the murder will give him at least 15 years in prison. Dahlia walks in and overhears Roberto confessing again to killing a man. We cut to find that the murdered man, Carlo Morosi, is in fact still alive. A murder is faked, 5 points. He gets up to make a call, standing by an ad for Fernet Branca, which makes me wonder, if that would be the J&B for Argentinian-made giallo films. He tells the person on the other line that they must meet up, that he's fed up with their game, that he's read about someone else being killed in the papers. With the killer now, we hear the angry, fatherly voice again. We see a photo of a little boy and a dog, then see said dog hanging in a flashback. Animals killed, 5 points. Okay, I used to treat this as 5 points being full points for animals overall, but now these will be separate tallies. We hear the voice shouting that the individual will be sent to an asylum. Cut to the professor telling Roberto about the man he saw last night fleeing the house with what appeared to be a cat. He says that he tried to intervene, but woke up minutes later with a nasty bump on his head. The mailman shows up, sees Roberto, and draws a billy club. There's a somewhat humorous standoff between him and the professor, but not enough for me to say it's really that funny. We cut to the killer meeting with Carlo at his place. Carlo says he's out. He doesn't want to be involved in this conspiracy anymore. He says the killer can have their toy back, and we see that the knife is actually a stage prop, a fully retractable blade with fake blood. Argento likes this so much he decides to use it again later in another film. POV, the killer's identity is hidden due to the framing, 2 points. Exposition dumping, 2 points. Carlo relays the history of his involvement, playing dead, nightly visits to the house, and a, quote, nasty business with the cat. He says that despite the maid learning about the conspiracy, that does not mean that she had to die to keep it quiet. Carlo is then attacked.
Nobody said anything about murder.
At a point for unintentionally funny. At another point for his repeated blows to the face. The accomplice is killed. Betrayal by the killer. 5 points. The killer looks around and finds some metal cables, which are then wrapped around Carlo's neck, prompting him to strangle. Look at these hands, remember these hands. Roberto gets in his car and finds a message. Translated, it says, "Now it's over. It's your turn." He seems more annoyed than scared. He drives up to a police station, but passes by. He does, however, arrive at the office of Gianni Arrosio. Close up on a door handle, 5 points. I am so tempted to count this as eyeball. We meet Arrosio and can instantly learn that...
Oh, can I help you?
Queer character, gay man, 5 points. The movie does another thing which will appear later in Deep Red, and that is the protagonist initially being scared off by a queer person. Arrosio assuages any doubts Roberto might have with hiring a gay private eye.
And you're thinking this fairy is going to jump on a chair and scream bloody murder if he sees a mouse? Yes, that's what I thought. Oh, you heterosexuals. I don't suppose you've ever had a homosexual experience?
Let's forget it, man.
Yes, we are men too, you know. Just a little different.
That's very comforting.
Mm-hmm.
And just like that, Argento has solved homophobia in 1971. Roberto covers Arrosio's lunch tab, and very briefly we can see, although it is out of focus, a bottle of J is for J&B, 5 points. Arrosio informs Roberto that despite being an expert of modern science and all that he hasn't solved one case in his 3 years of service as a PI. He assures Roberto that the odds are now in his favor to break the streak of failure. Cut to Dahlia returning the smut to its rightful recipient. Okay. Arrosio questions Roberto during a car ride. Q is for questions, 5 points. Roberto answers that he has no other woman in his life. Arrosio discerns that Roberto and his family do not have money, but that Nina's family is well off and left her a substantial inheritance. Arrosio is dropped off. Outside his home, the professor warns Roberto that a man has been inside the house with Nina for half an hour. Out walks Nina and a police commissioner. She tells Roberto that she told the commissioner some things, not everything, but that she doesn't feel safe and wishes to go with her family, and so she does. Dahlia is left with Roberto. She tells him that Nina told her everything about the blackmail. She suggests a bath would be good for him. He protests, and then we cut to a bath. Okay, this gave me a chuckle, so add a point for intentionally funny. Roberto pretends to drown, which is kinda silly, but mostly just dumb. A lot of the jokes in this movie are just kinda like, ha 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 ha. Dahlia begins massaging Roberto, but he starts to act like a total perv, a womanizer, and an adulterer. He begins groping her. Typical 1970s Italian misogyny. Woman is molested, groped, or sexually assaulted. 7 points. The lady doth protest, but then... N is for nudity, 5 points. I is for infidelity, 5 points. Necking, 5 points. Dahlia kind of expresses shame in them hooking up, but not really. I mean, not enough to be ashamed enough to stop. Arosio comes by to inquire about some evidence, but when Roberto goes to get the wallet belonging to Carlo, he finds the cat dead in a bag. This movie has as many dead animals as it does people thus far. Once more, we have the recurring beheading nightmare. Roberto awakens again. Dahlia attempts to comfort him. Arosio, while looking over the clues, seems to have stumbled onto something. He calls Roberto and tells him that he may be onto something, though it is likely a red herring, but he neglects to share the specifics of which. He asks if Villa Rapiti is familiar, but it is not to Roberto. Villa Rapiti is an insane asylum. Arosio is there now, speaking with the man in charge. We come in mid-conversation. The patient being spoken of is said to have had a homicidal mania, which they were cured of after 3 years, but that they assumed that, quote, the man was not the patient's real father. We only get pieces of what is being talked about, but can assume this is related to the flashbacks of the killer and that fatherly voice. Montage of Arosio going around town and questioning people. He may or may not be being spied upon. Roberto is in the studio when Nina calls. He seems bothered by her inquiry into what he's doing, whether he plans to leave too. Arosio pulls up to his next stop. Faulty car, 2 points. Arosio goes in to speak to this next man. The killer watches him go in, then prepares a syringe full of some mysterious blue liquid. Kind of looks like the water of life. Arosio leaves, notices someone, and follows them. Arosio keeps his eye on the individual on the subway. People get off, and more get on. At the next stop, Arosio chases the mystery person off. Curious how the subway is both crowded and then empty when the script demands it. He follows movement into the public bathroom. Once inside, he checks all the toilets, but inside the last one, he is assaulted with a stick. The killer locks the door, rips his shirt open, and sticks him with the syringe and shoots the blue liquid into his heart. E is for eyeballs, 5 points. The assailant congratulates Arosio for correctly guessing who the killer is, then leaves. Arosio, as he dies, takes solace at the fact that for once he was correct in solving a case. Roberto is with one of his friends who asks him what's going on, if there's another woman in the picture. Roberto says no, and the friend warns him that the neighbor girl, Maria, is in love with Roberto. He is distracted though by the news of Arosio's murder in the paper. Roberto takes a walk down the street, and then we cut to this scene of what appears to be a trade show for coffins. Okay, some of these bits are humorous, but again, just not quite enough for a laugh out loud. Except this part here made me crack up, despite I should have seen it coming.
Excuse me, could I have a light? Thank you.
Yeah, that one got me. Roberto tells God about his recurring nightmare, and God suggests that Roberto finally go to the police. Godfrey says that the killer seems to be a homicidal paranoid, not too unlike the patient we learned about. Roberto asks if he should go off with Nina, and Godfrey says it couldn't hurt. Cut to Dahlia with the voice of the angry father being heard. We hear the voice no less than 3 times. So, was she the patient? She calls Roberto, who is busy at the studio listening to the playback. He is told that Dahlia has just called. Dahlia, alone at home, packs, but hears a sound in the other room and comes down the hallway. She doesn't find anyone or anything and returns. She hears a sound again and knows that she's being stalked. And wow, the cat and mouse of this scene is really drawn out. Dahlia goes out into this dark and lonely stairwell. We get some jarring cuts back and forth to a ringing phone, see that Roberto is calling, but Dahlia ascends the stairs, getting farther and farther away. At the top, she arms herself, then hides in a bureau or something. I'm not good with these types of things. The sound of someone entering the room and searching is overheard. After some time, once she believes she is finally in the clear, Dahlia exits and goes to leave, but is instantly attacked once she rounds the corner. She is slashed and then tumbles down the stairs. Add another point for unintentionally funny. The blade goes in, and Dahlia's life goes out. Extra points for I is for infidelity, for murder occurring after the fact. 5 more points. The family and Roberto are standing over the body of Dahlia. M is for morgue, 5 points. It's not quite a morgue, but shh. A man approaches Nina and begins to ask her about conducting a test on Dahlia's body, but she says that she is not interested, but to ask her husband. Well, he does, and clarifies that a recent forensic test can be done on the eyes of a recent victim hours after death, which can show the last image the victim saw recorded on their eyes. This test could be used to see the murderer's face. The test is done, and an image comes back of 4 blurry flies. Odd clue, 5 points. Now, I'm going to add extra points for E is for eyeballs, for the eyeball being ripped out here for scientific purposes. 5 points. Okay, I know I do count this usually for mutilation, and I do technically have a separate tally for mutilations of body parts, and eyes being one of them. But I don't consider this a mutilation per se. But the fact that the eyeball was removed for science has got to be worth something, and I think extra points for E is for eyeballs is warranted. Roberto acquires a handgun and loads it. Godfrey tells Roberto to not leave the house, to remain home, secure the home field advantage, and to bait the killer to come to him. He agrees, and it's on. Character takes prescription pills, 5 points. He waits, gun in hand. Outside, Maria approaches the man from the party. Andrea, I believe is his name. Cut back, and Roberto has passed out. His nightmare finally shows the decapitation occur. The phone rings. It's Godfrey. He offers to come over, but the line cuts, and the power goes out. Roberto is now heavily on the defensive. He stumbles around the house blindly. He grabs some wires and rigs it so that he'll be able to turn the lights back on. Just then, someone approaches the door. They enter, and he bursts the lights on, but it is Nina, returned. F is for fashion, 5 points. You almost thought I'd forgotten about that one, didn't you? Honestly, I'm not really crazy about anybody's outfit, but she's doing something here. I don't really like it, but she's doing something. She asks what is going on, and Roberto explains that she has to get out of here right now. He gives her his keys and tells her to get out of here as fast as she can. He pushes her out, but her necklace rocks side to side, revealing that the fly centerpiece, when set in motion, appears as 4 blurry flies. Now, I will not count this little clip as a flashback. Roberto pulls Nina in, realizing that she must be the killer. He slaps her to the ground. Typical 1970s Italian misogyny, woman is slapped, 5 points. He picks her up and slaps her down again. And the fact that she slides on the floor from the force makes me laugh. I'm sorry. Add another point to unintentionally funny. She pulls a gun on Roberto and yells at him to let go. Extra points for Y is for yelling, for a hysterical woman yelling. Add another 5 points. She reveals that she is the killer and the blackmailer. Although, during Carlo's murder scene, those hands are without a doubt the hairy hands of a man. Fake Shemps, I know. Hidden identity of the killer until the final moments, 5 points. Impossible scientific method or forensics to solve, 3 points. Nina instantly starts acting crazy, confessing and shouting madly at Roberto. He asks her why, and she says because Roberto is so much like, quote, him. Then she shoots Roberto. I think the pillow was supposed to be a suppressor, but hasn't that been proven to not really work? Nina blames her bastard father for trying to bring her up as a boy because he felt cheated for getting a daughter. She says he raised her like a boy and would beat her. This final scene is interspersed with undubbed and untranslated portions of the original Italian dub, which likely was cut from the US version, but put back in for the US DVD release. She shoots him again. She keeps monologuing. Back in English, she says from the moment she met Roberto and his uncanny resemblance to her father, she knew that she would kill him. She shoots again, but misses. In bursts God Almighty in all his glory. Roberto throws an object and knocks the gun from Nina's hand.
You got me monologuing. I can't believe it.
Godfrey springs towards her and she flees from the house. Roberto tells Godfrey that Nina is batshit crazy. Outside, after seeing the flashback one final time, we watch as Nina gets in the car and speeds off. She looks back, not keeping her eyes on the road. Reckless driving, 5 points. A lorry pulls in front of her. She slams on the brakes, but is going too fast. In super slow-mo, we watch as Nina collides with the truck. Her head rolls off, so I guess now she'll keep her eyes on the road. Until it's scraped off the pavement like last week's roadkill. Killer dies accidentally, 3 points. And the credits roll. Let's add up some final cliches. O is for obsession. Add extra points for the killer being obsessed, 10 points. And extra points for S is for secrets, for the killer having an impossible to predict motivation, 5 more points. I won't be adding extra points for T is for telephone for the killer making a call because despite Nina being on the phone a few times, she doesn't make the call. I know, it's a nitpicky caveat. But what about the tally we really want to know the results of? How funny is 4 flies on gray velvet on accident versus on purpose? 6 instances for me of laughing at something unintentionally funny against 3 instances of intentionally funny. The winner is unintentionally funny. And that's 4 flies on gray velvet. I've already given my thoughts on this film at the end of my Patreon viewing for it. There are aspects I do really like about the film, but ultimately I find it to be rather disappointing. I know, thou shalt not criticize early Argento, but I'm sorry, this one just drops the ball for me. To its credit, I love the killer's aesthetic, and I love the music by Morricone that closes the film. Argento does some great tricks with the camera, and a couple of the kills are handled impressively. Also, the characters of Arosio, played by Jean-Pierre Marielle, and Godfrey, played by Bud Spencer, are highlights. Beyond this, the film relies way too heavily on over-the-top editing choices, which, in my opinion, do not really add anything to the film and are style over substance. The sound design is also jarring and unpleasant. The writing is fraught with far too many attempts at humor, and moments meant to be thrilling are unintentionally funny. The reveal is rather weak, plus the plot device of the image in the eye is so ridiculous, although generally I forgive it because they managed to do something very interesting with how they present it. The movie also just sort of drags for me. No offense to anyone who likes this movie. I personally could never get super into it, and I do not dislike this movie, but I do wish it was handled better. I can't emphasize that enough. I don't dislike this movie. The thing with a lot of these giallo movies is that I see trailers and whatnot for them, or like the DVD covers. This is like, traditionally the last like 10 years. And I'd be like, oh, I got to get that movie. Well, I can't wait to watch it. And then I watch it and I'm like, that was just kind of corny. So 4 Flies on Gray Velvet was one of the movies I was really expecting would be like super creepy. And it has its moments, but ultimately I think it tries too hard to be goofy. It's also not as well handled as Bird with the Crystal Plumage and Cat o' Nine Tails, and that is a battle I will take on. Like, if you like the movie, there's nothing wrong with that. And you can personally like it better than those other movies, but I do think that those other two in the Animal Trilogy are better. That's like without a doubt. Anyways, let's segue to the GialliTally cliches for this movie. Post-Giallo viewing cliches. The reason for the killing. Let's go with both psychological trauma and mental illness, psychopathy, or obsession. Both are worth the same points, so it doesn't matter. 7 points. The reason for the investigation. Private investigator. 3 points. But let's also add extra points for amateur sleuth because Roberto takes up the mantle at the end. 5 points. Bonus points. The style bonus. The funny thing is that this movie is both overly stylish and not that stylish. Most of the style is in the editing and perhaps the sound design. I'm not too crazy about either's usage in this particular movie, but according to the cliched stylistic tropes I look out for, the movie doesn't employ a whole lot. There's hardly a proper zoom. We have some instances of slow-mo here and there, and that super slow-mo at the end. We have a spinning camera in the asylum scenes. There are some great shots, however, and the optical effect with the fly necklace is amazing. And it's the reason why Argento decided to keep that plot device in the movie once he saw how good the effect would look. And the bullet flying by is pretty effective. It's pretty cool. Also, despite a lot of the kills being kind of goofy, like people just getting bonked on the head, the kill with Dahlia, I mean, the part where she's stumbling down the stairs is kind of funny, but the blade coming down and then the close-up on her eyes is great. Really good. Well, out of a max of 25 points possible, I will give Four Flies 15 points for its style bonus. Soundtrack.
You idiot.
They look like flies.
The Morricone elements seem sporadically sprinkled throughout the movie, but hell yes, 15 points. Bad effects. Yeah, we have a fly on a string and some fake heads, so 12 points I'll say. Final look, extra points. The Deadpool tallying how many kills and deaths are featured in the film. I break it down as thus. 10 points per kill or death scene for the main Deadpool, plus any stylistic kill multipliers, which we didn't add yet, plus the knife kill bonus. We have Amelia. We hear that her throat was slit, but we did not see it, so just 10 points. Carlo Marossi, bludgeoned, then garroted, and since the latter killed him, we'll go with points for that. 13 points. Gianni Arosio. I'm tempted to say impaled with a syringe, but he is more accurately poisoned. Actually, let's do it. Let's actually do that. How much is impaled? 16 points. Dahlia, impaled with a knife. 21 points. Nina Tobias, vehicular, but the final result is her decapitation. 20 points. I'll also add the execution victim because we see it. Decapitation, 20 points. Extended Deadpool for those other deaths mentioned but not seen. I'll give 3 points for each. There's none. I'm not going to count the story the one guy says about the funeral of the French chef. That's just dumb. Red herrings for the total number of legitimate suspects in the film. 5 points per legit suspect are awarded. We have Amelia, Carlo, Nina, and I guess I'll add these two, though I think it's a stretch. Andrea and Maria. 25 points. Honestly, there aren't many credible options in this movie. Flashback sequences, 5 points each. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. 60 points for flashbacks. Nudity, I award 5 points for ass, 7 for breasts, and 10 for genitalia. We have breasts and breasts. 14 points. That's it. Ladies and gentlemen, for Four Flies on Grey Velvet, I awarded the film an AZ score of 18 out of 26. With the bonus points for these, we have a modified score total of 120 points. And for the full GialliTally score, I award Four Flies on Grey Velvet a GialliTally score of 594 points, compared to The Case of the Bloody Iris in first with 830 points, Slaughter Hotel in second with 827 points, and A Lizard in a Woman's Skin in third with 759 points. Four Flies on Grey Velvet is in 8th place with 594 points. I predicted 600, so I was pretty damn close. That's all I got to say. But like I also say, these points do not mean a movie is better or worse. Please like this video, share it with your friends if they are horror fans or cinephiles, subscribe to The King in Giallo if you haven't yet. If you have any questions, thoughts, curiosities, or concerns, leave those below in the comment section and I will get back to you. Give The King in Giallo a follow on Instagram and a like on Facebook. Subscribe to The King in Giallo Patreon to see early access to my videos and exclusive content that can only be found there, such as the viewings with over 20 videos, The King in Giallo podcast, the Giallo Adjacent podcast, the Rat Hole Burn movie reviews, and the Giallo Reads book reviews. Next time on The King in Giallo will be the overview, review, and GialliTally for the second Giallo film from Luigi Bazzoni, The Fifth Chord. Thank you all very much for your continued support. This is Tanner Leeser for The King in Giallo, and if nothing else, I'll see you next time.
Looking for something?
Oh, hello. I was looking for you.
Me?
Yeah.